Last month, I set out to achieve an impossible challenge in Manor Lords. Beat the Baron on max difficulty without hiring mercenaries. Long story short, he spanked me harder than P. Diddy at a freak-off. It pissed me off so much, it became my life's goal for over a month to not only crush the Baron, but also destroy Manor Lords itself. And to be a good sport, I added extra rules to the challenge. I'm not allowed to hire mercenaries, the Baron can have them all. No importing goods, all resources needed to be obtained from the map and transported between regions manually. I had to build a massive castle on the hill in the middle of the map. Difficulty settings were on max, except for the cheating Baron that's a bastard. And I wasn't allowed to start with any useful resources in the first region. So without further ado, let me tell you the story of the empire that broke Manor Lords. The starting region had rich wild animals and mushrooms, which made early population growth much faster. The early food surplus helped stabilize approval, but the region was missing other key resources like rich stone and iron deposits. Because of that, expansion to the east was planned early to secure a rich iron deposit, while expansion to the south was saved for later to access rich soil that could support barley and flax. Before placing any buildings, roads were laid out first to outline future farm fields and create clear paths towards nearby regions. This made it easier to plan long-term expansion, with the town eventually filling in the spaces between the roads and the farming areas. The starting build order mattered a lot because this was on max difficulty settings. Construction began with a hitching post, followed by a logging camp, granary, storehouse, and marketplace to cover the basic needs as quickly as possible. A second ox was ordered for 20 gold to speed up construction and log transportation. 6 burgage plots were built right away to push approval higher. Homelessness causes massive unhappiness, and the 6th plot allowed for immigration to begin almost immediately. The Regensburg Guildsman perk was taken to generate an extra passive income of +1 regional wealth from all burgage plots, with the only downside being a slightly worse approval once taxation was turned on. Approval was boosted further by building a well, after which food collection became the next major priority. Mushrooms needed to be gathered before they decayed for the year, and hunting had to start early so animals could supply both meat for food and pelts for profits. Labor was closely managed, with workers shifting between food buildings to make sure nothing went to waste. A woodcutter was also added to build up firewood stockpile before winter began, and a saw pit followed soon after to produce planks for a church and other future upgrades. As the town grew, more burgage plots were added to keep the population increasing. A charcoal kiln was built to improve fuel efficiency, and firewood storage was disabled at the storehouse, so all firewood would be converted into charcoal first, effectively doubling its value. A church was built after that, completing the Tier 1 requirements for the burgage plots. By August, the town had reached 10 burgage plots and had over 13 months of food storage. With supply secured, the focus shifted towards growing population through the winter and setting up for a strong harvest the following year. Attention then turned towards iron production for tools and spears. Additional burgage plots were built along with a farmhouse to get wheat and rye planted before the end of the year. The farmhouse was upgraded to allow oxen to assist with farming, making early fieldwork much more efficient. A trade post was built on the King's Road to sell pelts from hunting. The income was planned for upgrading burgage plot backyard extensions. Mushroom gathering had ended once growth stopped for the year, but not before more than 300 mushrooms were collected in the first season. Not a bad yield. 5 burgage plots were built near the trade post and upgraded with apiaries. Each upgrade cost 50 gold each, but they did produce honey and wax throughout the year, which could be sold for steady profits. Apiaries also improved crop yields across the region, making them one of the most valuable early upgrades, if you can afford it. Once fields were planted, labor was shifted towards mining iron, gathering logs, expanding housing, and clearing stones from the farm fields. 2 burgage plots were upgraded to level 2 and eventually converted into a blacksmith and a joiner's workshop, producing the equipment needed for the spear militia. A stone collector was built to clear the remaining stone and open land for farming next year, and a bloomery was added to convert iron ore into iron slabs. Not long after, bandits began stealing the town's supplies, forcing military production to ramp up very quickly. Workshop limits were set to 10 spears and 10 large shields to avoid overproduction, and militia units were recruited and equipped as gear became available. Once the stone deposit was fully cleared, the collector and nearby roads were removed to make room for farming fields. A group of 24 spear militia was sent east to deal with the bandit camp. Although the bandits managed to steal food during the march, the militia won the fight without any losses, earning 360 influence and 160 treasury. Just days later, though, another bandit camp appeared in the same region, so the militia were rallied again to wipe them out before any more goods could be stolen, and more importantly to logistics to keep production moving efficiently. Bread production was established next. New infrastructure was built to support it properly, including a grain-only granary, a windmill placed nearby, and a central layout serving the 3 large fields planned from the start of the run. The forger hut was upgraded with an herb garden to help treat sick families. Since sick families don't work, it's important to keep them healthy for the economy's sake. The well was also upgraded so it could supply water to more than 15 burgage plots and keep approval high. More farm fields were built and crops were rotated between wheat, rye, and fallow to maintain yields. 2 burgage plots were placed near the windmills, which would eventually be upgraded into bakeries to convert flour into bread. Bakeries are far more efficient than the communal oven, turning 1 wheat flour into 4 bread and 1 rye flour into 2 rye bread, which is double what the communal oven can do. Right before harvest season, bandits appeared again. A group of 21 spear militia was sent out to deal with them, while labor was shifted to make sure the harvest still came in on time. The bandits were defeated without losses, pushing influence past 1,000. That influence was used to claim the northern region. Now, the northern region was not especially valuable, containing only stone and fish, but claiming it prevented bandit camps from spawning there, which meant the Baron had no chance of stealing bandits now. But because it was so late in the year and food would be scarce during the winter, colonization was delayed until the next spring. Even more fields were added to increase next year's harvest and to make use of the excess labor. Fortunately, the fields were all plowed and sown before winter set in. Additional logging buildings were placed around the map to prepare for the upcoming wood-based industries. You might notice a running theme here. Meat ran low again, so pig pens were expanded to 5 more burgage plots. Families living near farmhouses were set as a permanent farming labor, removing the need for constant micromanagement later on. Several industries began struggling due to the lack of tools, so 20 more tools were produced. Even with that, it was clear that additional iron from other regions would be needed very soon to avoid shortages in both tools and spears. The wool and clothing industries were started next. 3 more burgage plots were built, along with an animal trader, a storehouse for wool, a weaver's workshop, and a sheep farm. Over a dozen large pastures were added to support more than 250 sheep, which will produce meat, wool for clothing, and leather for shoes. The sheep imports began shortly after, starting with a 10 sheep limit at 30 gold each. A total of 300 gold would be needed to buy them all. Once established, the sheep would breed on their own and slowly fill the pastures up over time. The woodcutter and charcoal kiln were relocated to the base of the mountain, where the tree density was much higher. New housing was built where the old wood industry was, supplying labor to the growing sheep and wool production. Toward the end of the year, another bandit camp appeared. The Baron once again sent mercenaries, and the town militia dispatched 1 spear regiment to reach the camp first. At the same time, a bandit raid was only 1 day away, forcing the militia to split their forces. If the Baron claimed the camp, his power would grow stronger, but if the raid overwhelmed the spearmen, most of the town would be lost. Year 2 ended with both threats still unresolved. 2 bandit regiments appeared to the west early in the year, forcing the militia to remain split. During the assault, the bandits split up to flank, which worked in the spearmen's favor. The first group was quickly engaged and nearly wiped out before the second group even arrived. 1 spearman was lost in the fight, but both groups were dispatched and the town was successfully defended. At the same time, the second militia group managed to beat the Baron's mercenaries to the bandit camp. The camp was cleared, securing the influence and treasury once more. With that victory, a 3rd region was claimed. The all-important rich iron deposit was finally secured. A corpse pit was built near the battlefield to deal with the dead bodies. Back in the main town, 3 more burgage plots were built near the sheep and wool industry, along with a large duplex that would support fruit production in the backyard. Fruit would become increasingly important, as higher-tier burgage plots require it to maintain approval. The expansion into the new region was delayed due to severe weather. A heavy rainstorm in late March, followed by another in early April, which lasted for weeks. Starting a settlement during this period would have damaged supplies and likely doomed the town to starvation. Once the rain finally broke, roads were laid out to section off strong farming areas, and settlers were placed for 250 gold. Wild animals were forced to migrate closer to the settlement, making early food collection easier. The same proven building order from the first town was used, starting with a logging camp, a hitching post with an extra ox, granary, storehouse, market, and a burgage plot. The origin perk Wieden Hinterlandes was chosen for the new region. It provided bonuses to farming at elevation, reduced the cost of animal imports, and increased the mining speed for both iron and clay. The only drawback, slower artisan workshops, which was acceptable since the town would mostly be producing raw materials to ship back to Teufelsberg. Both food sources at Himmelreich were secured quickly, and work began on firewood and plank production next. The settlement was expected to be stable by winter, with iron shipments to the main town starting early next year. Back at Teufelsberg, the focus shifted towards saving 300 regional wealth to upgrade a pear orchard and begin producing high-yield pears. That upgrade was expected to be completed by the end of the year. A church was also built at Himmelreich to resolve lingering approval issues. At Teufelsberg, another 3 morgens of farmland were added. The only limitation was population, as more families were needed to fully staff the fields. Bandits appeared again just before the harvest season. They were intercepted and killed in a neutral neighboring region, avoiding the need to bury their bodies. The militia returned just in time to help secure the harvest for the year. The main farming area at Teufelsberg had finished harvesting with 8 days left, showing that it could handle more work. So 1 additional morgen of farm plots were added. Plans were made to trade iron ore for food between the 2 towns to allow population growth to continue throughout the winter. An iron mine was built to begin extraction. The harvest brought in over 400 bread worth of wheat and rye, which meant there was plenty to barter for iron while still maintaining enough supply for consumption. Sheep began reproducing and the herd expanded. A tailor workshop was built at Teufelsberg to turn yarn into clothing, satisfying Tier 2 burgage plot needs. 4 burgage plots were also upgraded with chicken coops to provide additional meat and animal products in the form of eggs. The pear orchard was finally upgraded, along with 4 more chicken coops to further stabilize food. A bloomery and smithy were built in Himmelreich to increase tool production to improve work speed. Since iron was literally infinite in this region, higher maintenance costs could be sustained in order to increase some buildings' efficiency. A pack station was constructed back at Teufelsberg, and bartering began between the 2 towns. Excess rye bread was traded for iron ore at a rate of 1 bread for 3 iron. This will allow tool and weapon production to scale up without draining food supplies too low, while also supporting population growth back in Himmelreich. Soon, Teufelsberg will need shoes, so 4 burgage plots were upgraded with goat extensions. These provide additional meat and animal products, but also hides, which turn into leather, and leather into shoes. And with that, year 3 came to a close. A new settlement was planned for Mistelitz once the rains cleared. Waiting, roads were laid out to map future farming land. In Himmelreich, additional burgage plots were built near the iron mine, along with a trade post to start generating some income. The region struggled with meat production, so the money was used to upgrade backyard extensions with pigs. Back in Teufelsberg, large shield productions was increased with plans to sell them soon. After a long reign in March, the settlement of Mistelitz was finally founded using the standard build order. With the weather holding, early development went smoothly. Pelts began selling in Himmelreich, and the Regensburg origin was chosen in Mistelitz to provide passive income from Tier 1 burgage plots. In Teufelsberg, a burgage plot was upgraded to Tier 2 to unlock a bowyer, allowing crossbows and longbow production. The blacksmith was also switched over to producing iron parts, which are required for crossbows. In Mistelitz, fishing was started first since it was a rich resource. Catch limits were adjusted upward to prevent overfishing, with mushroom gathering added afterward. Himmelreich continued to reinvest trade profits back into meat production to avoid starvation. Farming operations continued expanding in Teufelsberg, and warbows were added to the trade lineup for additional income. Mistelitz grew quickly, reaching nearly 10 families before the first harvest, with strong food and firewood supplies, along with a well and even a church. The Baron claimed Lecha to the south, denying a new settlement in the region with rich soil. In response, another spear militia was formed in Teufelsberg, as Lecha would not have access to crossbows for some time. The plan shifted towards claiming the final region, building 3 crossbow regiments and 3 spear militia, supported by a small retinue, and then taking Lecha back by force. Crossbows were sent to Himmelreich for barter, trading 1 crossbow for 5 iron, replacing the rye bread barter. Sending 20 crossbows brought back 100 iron, more than enough to cover tool productions, spears, and additional crossbows for other regions. A bandit camp appeared soon after, and the Baron moved mercenaries to attack it from his newly claimed territory. Spear militia were scrambled to beat him to it and cleared the camp first. With more than 1,000 influence saved again, the final region was claimed, and the last crossbow militia regiment was placed in reserve. In Himmelreich, the bloomery and smithy were relocated closer to the iron mine and trade post. The goal was to produce enough tools locally to sell for profit while still supplying iron to the other towns. The claim on the new region, Schwarzholz, was finalized, and a new crossbow Crossbow Regiment was formed there. A manor house was finally placed in Teufelsberg on top of the hill, with additional roads added to improve access to the future castle site. In Mistelitz, large burgage plot backyards were built to support vegetable production, and in Himmelreich, the first harvest for this region was collected, which should solve most food issues. Mules were ordered at the Teufelsberg pack station to speed up the iron bartering. More fruit orchards were also built in preparation for Tier 3 burgage plot upgrades. Grain processing was added in Himmelreich to begin bread production. Construction of the manor house continued, even as peasants froze while hauling materials up the hill. I guess long treks up a massive mountain in the dead of winter is a bad idea, but I'm willing to make the sacrifice. By the end of the year, Himmelreich had 12 crossbowmen, with more weapons still needed to fully staff the regiment. Church bells rang as the year came to a close. Mistelitz reached 16 families in its first year, an unusually strong start, and still had time to get farm fields planted for the season's harvest. And so, year 4 came to a close. The manor house was finally completed early in the year. Taxes were briefly raised to 4% to generate enough income to fund another settlement, then lowered back down to 1% to avoid an approval penalty. Not long after, raiders appeared to the south. 3 spear regiments were mustered to face 4 raider brigands. The fight was intense, but only a single spearman was lost, and the raiders were driven off. With 1,900 influence already banked, only 100 more was needed to claim one of the barons' land, though more troops and equipment were still required before attempting that. Another heavy rain arrived in mid-April, delaying expansion once again. When the weather finally cleared on April 20th, the settlement of Schwarzholz was founded. Wild animals were pushed closer to the rich mushroom deposits, and the standard starting build order was put in place. Rich mushrooms were collected first to prepare for winter, and the Regensburg guildsman origin was chosen for passive income. At Himmelreich, a tools trade route was purchased for 30 gold, allowing for more steady profits to begin flowing in. At Teufelsberg, additional preparation was done for Tier 3 family upgrades. A lime kiln was built to produce the 10 lime needed for the church upgrade, followed by a stonemason to convert rough stone once imports began from Mistelitz. A tannery was added to turn hides into leather, along with a nearby burgage plot planned for a cobbler to convert leather into shoes. Clothing production at Teufelsberg was going so well that excess stock had to be sold off, as over 350 units had begun clogging the storehouse. Sheep numbers continued to climb, reaching 40 adults and 43 lambs, showing strong long-term exponential growth. In Himmelreich, only 3 more crossbows were needed to complete a full regiment. Once filled, crossbow trading was paused and pelts were used instead to barter for iron. Pelt cells were disabled in Teufelsberg to build up enough supply for that barter. It's safer to exchange non-essential items like pelts than it is food, since pack stations can't set limits and can easily drain a resource down to 0. Crossbow bartering from Teufelsberg to Mistelitz began next, trading weapons for rubble stone to help arm the region. Once the quarry was finished, trades would shift from rubble to rough stone. The new settlement in Schwarzholz continued to perform very well, reaching 12 families before winter with a nearly full year of food and firewood stored along with the church. Mistelitz eventually began sending rough stone in exchange for crossbows. Church bells rang to mark the end of the year, and the settlements were stable, expanding, and well positioned for the final confrontation ahead. Crossbows began shipping from Teufelsberg to Schwarzholz in exchange for iron ore. With deliveries underway, all 3 crossbow regiments were close to being battle-ready. A manor house was built in Himmelreich to help defend against raids from the edge of the map. Around this time, royal taxes were introduced. A payment of 355 treasury would be due next year, which would cut directly into funds planned for retinue expansion. With crossbow recruitment nearly complete, the focus shifted towards generating steady revenue that could be taxed and used to pay the king's tax, but still have left over to grow the retinue. Apiaries were built in both Mistelitz and Himmelreich to increase trade goods. Manor houses were also constructed in Mistelitz and Schwarzholz to support retinue recruitment and begin forming small castles. In Himmelreich, plans were made to start clay extraction and tile production, which would then produce huge profits. Mistelitz's crossbow militia was finally full with 36 soldiers. Schwarzholz ran out of iron ore to trade partway through the process, so coal was substituted to finish the remaining barter. With that completed, all 6 militia regiments across the realm were fully armed. Back in Teufelsberg, the church was upgraded to the next tier to support further town growth. Rough stone sales began in Mistelitz with plans to transition into dressed stone later. Schwarzholz would handle the rough stone exports long term to avoid oversupplying the market and driving prices down. Castle construction also began in Himmelreich, Mistelitz, and Schwarzholz to strengthen the defenses against raids from all directions. By the end of the year, bread production was fully automated across all 4 regions, using 2 bakeries in each town, one for wheat bread and one for rye. An armorsmith was built in Teufelsberg to begin helmet production, with Gambeson's plan for later once flax became available. The focus for next year would be expanding trade activity in every region, carefully taxing the population to support retinue growth, and potentially taking Lecha from the Baron. Year 6 came to a close with the realm fully protected and nearly ready for the final phase of expansion against the Baron. Schwarzholz began expanding north to secure a new stone deposit, while Mistelitz transitioned into selling dressed stone instead. Additional horses were purchased across all regions to speed up trade post activity. Taxation was enabled everywhere to increase treasury income, and the first royal tax payment of 409 treasury was paid to the greedy bastard, the king. In Teufelsberg, the cobbler began producing shoes, and a butcher was built to manage the growing sheep population. Sheep numbers were kept high as possible, with only lambs culled down to 10 to maintain long-term growth. Not long after, raiders appeared north of Schwarzholz. 2 spear and 1 crossbow militia were rallied to defend the region. As the raiders advanced through the farm fields, crossbows thinned their numbers at range. The enemy attacked in small groups at first, allowing spear units to charge and break them quickly. The remaining raiders then pushed in from multiple directions, but the spearmen held their ground and routed them. The raiders were defeated without a single loss, and enough influence was secured to claim 2 of the Baron's regions. A severe drought hit in August, destroying many of the crops and sharply reducing the fish population in the north. Despite this, income remained strong, with over 140 treasury generated each month. This was enough to cover the annual tax payment while still leaving surplus funds to expand the retinue. To support future trade, fruit production in Teufelsberg was scaled up and prepared for use as barter goods between regions. By the end of the year, only 5 helmets were missing to fully equip the spear militia. Internal sheep trading was set up to move sheep from Teufelsberg to all the other regions without having to pay the 10 gold import tariff per animal. Shoe production began, which would be needed very soon. The year ended with a clear plan in place to confront the Baron in the coming year. Royal taxes of 460 treasury were paid early in the year, after which over 1,000 treasury was spent upgrading and hiring new retinue at Himmelreich. A garrison tower was built to increase the retinue limit to 24, though funds only allowed 14 to be hired. All 3 outer regions were set to import 10 sheep each to begin local breeding everywhere. Treasury was then fully drained to hire and upgrade the retinue to its maximum size, resulting in 24 fully armored knights. With preparations complete, all 6 militia regiments and the fully upgraded retinue assembled in Lecha to push a claim against the Baron. 2,000 influence was spent to press the claim. The previous month had featured extremely strong mercenaries, like these crossbowmen, but the current rotation was much weaker, making this the ideal moment to strike. The Baron contested the claim, and battle began. He committed 5 personal regiments along with 6 mercenary units, creating a lopsided 11-7 battle. The militia took advantage of the terrain, setting up on a hill with spearmen forming the front line, retinue positioned on the left flank, and crossbows protected in the rear. Mercenary infantry were sent in first and were met with 3 full volleys of crossbow bolts. By the time they reached the spears, they had taken nearly 50% casualties, and 1 more volley was enough to break them. A brigand regiment then attacked from the right flank, forcing the spears to turn and engage. Moments later, 3 additional melee regiments charged head-on, while the rest of the enemy army attempted to flank from the left. All spear units were fully committed to the fight, while the retinue was deliberately held in reserve to allow the crossbows to continue firing uninterrupted. An enemy archer unit slipped through and reached the rear, prompting all 3 crossbow regiments to turn and focus them down. At the same time, the spears on the right routed the brigands and rotated back to protect the crossbows. Crossbow fire steadily shredded the enemy archers, while the remaining spear militia gained the upper hand in the engagement and routed their opponents, evening the battle. Once the last archer in that unit was destroyed, the enemy was left with only a single ranged regiment. Crossbows shifted fire onto charging infantry, inflicting devastating losses before contact. The infantry collapsed quickly against the spear line. Enemy archers then began focusing fire on the spears and retinue, prompting the crossbows to advance and unleash volleys of their own. The enemy attempted a direct charge into the spears, allowing the retinue to execute a perfectly timed flank that instantly shattered their formation. Another brigand regiment was sent forward and collapsed seconds later after 3 volleys and their charge damage being reflected back onto them. With the crossbows now in range, counterfire began against the remaining archers, although the forest cover slowed the process. The Baron finally committed his retinue into the fight, charging the spears, but they were were met head-on by the fully armored retinue and surrounded by the other spear militia. Under sustained pressure, the enemy retinue broke and fled while their archers were cut down. The battle slowly ground to its conclusion, with the final archer units eliminated and the last infantry regiment shattering moments after engaging the elite retinue. With only 7 total losses, the Baron was decisively defeated in what would go down as one of the worst military disasters in Manor Lords history, remembered as the disaster at Lecha. With Lecha secured, roads were laid out to map the rich barley fields, as the region would supply barley for all the settlements. A new settlement was founded in September, with the build order completed by October, and the town was ready for winter. Sheep in Himmelreich began dying due to the high elevations, so pastures were moved downhill to prevent further loss. Annoyingly, sheep had to be relocated again due to steep terrain preventing construction, with processing buildings remaining on the top of the hill. The Regensburg Guildsman perk was taken in Lecha to support the large farming population plan for this region. Population growth there was limited due to food shortages, but several industries were prepared in advance for spring. The year ended with the settlement surviving winter with just 1 month of food remaining, but positioned to rapidly expand population and begin full farming operations in year 9. With food supplies returning in Lecha, population growth resumed and farming operations expanded again. At the same time, Mistelitz and Schwarzholz struggled with low production due to tool shortages. To stabilize tool production in Teufelsberg, bread shipments were sent in exchange for iron ore at a 5-to-1 ratio. Additional barter routes were set up from Teufelsberg to ship tools to Mistelitz in exchange for salt, providing a temporary fix while a long-term solution was still needed. Farming in Lecha was expanded further to increase barley, flax, and wheat output. Sausage production began at the Teufelsberg butchery, converting 1 pork into 2 meat sausages to improve food efficiency. Not long after, 4 raider brigands appeared in the south. 3 spear militia from Teufelsberg were mustered and rushed in to stop them from burning Lecha to the ground. The spears were forced to sprint, leaving them exhausted and disorganized by the time combat began. The raiders were eventually defeated, but 4 spearmen were lost in the process. To improve logistics, a central collection zone was built in Lecha to gather barley and flax after harvest and prepare shipments back to Teufelsberg. The first harvest in Lecha was successful, yielding 40 flax and 73 barley. Pairs from Teufelsberg began trading for both flax and barley. An ale industry was also established in Teufelsberg, processing barley into hops, then hops into ale, which was served through an alehouse to satisfy that need. Lecha came dangerously close to running out of food, but bread production was brought online with only 1 month of supplies remaining, saving the settlement from collapse. 4 of the 5 planned apiaries were built in Lecha, increasing trade income and, more importantly, boosting farm field yields. In Teufelsberg, flax was converted into linen, and linen into gambus and armor to better equip the spear militias. A manor house was constructed in Lecha to strengthen defenses against future raids, while dressed stone production was increased in Mistelitz to expand trade profits there. The year ended with plans in place to significantly scale up ale production in the year ahead, and possibly take another region from the Baron. Barley and flax farming in Lecha was expanded again as food production continued to stabilize. Royal taxes of 670 treasury were paid, leaving only 1 more year at the lowest tax rate before it doubles. Manor house construction in Lecha was completed, allowing 12 retinue to be hired and fully upgraded, with plans to build a garrison tower later to unlock the remaining 12. In Schwarzholz, stone mining operations were restructured by relocating the storehouse, lime kiln, and several families back south closer to the trading post, which would improve efficiency. In Himmelreich, the clay mine was depleted and upgraded into a deep mine to continue clay tile production. The 5th and final apiary was built in Lecha, pushing farm field yields up by 13%. With forests being cleared to make room for farms, backyard extensions in Lecha were shifted towards chicken coops, since pigs benefit more from forests, while chickens produce the same regardless of your terrain. The first brewery was built in Teufelsberg, and soon the ale would be flowing. Long-term barter routes were established to send pears from Teufelsberg in exchange for flax and barley from Lecha, though pear orchards would still need time to reach their full maturity. Internal trade routes were also set up to ship tools from Teufelsberg to other regions, which proved more efficient for low-volume trades, while pack stations remained better for high-volume transport. Farm fields in Lecha were nearly doubled for this season, and the harvest brought in 214 barley and 89 flax, putting next year's output on track to nearly double. Another 3 morgens of crops were planted just before winter. The Lecha Manor House was finally upgraded, allowing the retinue to expand to a full built 24 knights, and a small castle was constructed to defend against future raids. In Teufelsberg, a large surplus of iron slabs had built up, so helmet production limits were increased at the armorsmith with plans to send them to regions with crossbows. With ale now flowing steadily, several burgage plots were upgraded to tier 3, meeting all needs immediately and boosting both approval and monthly tax income. The year ended with the Baron pushing a claim on Teufelsberg, likely encouraged by a rotation of extremely strong mercenaries, setting the stage for a massive battle to come. The retinue at Teufelsberg was increased to 12 and mustered alongside the rest of the army, assembling at the top of the mountain to contest the Baron's claim. The battlefield was set on the ridge itself, an unfortunate timing with the castle still unfinished. 8 full mercenary regiments approached from the north, including 3 archer units and 5 melee, while the Baron's personal forces of 5 regiments advanced from the east, creating a 13 versus 9 engagement. The militia and retinue moved to the ridge to begin the defense. Retinue units charged anything that came too close, quickly tying up 2 infantry regiments. Orders were given to push forward, and after a prolonged melee, 1 enemy group broke and fled, though more infantry continued to pour into the fight. Losses slowly accumulated, but the enemy regiments began routing one by one. Once the Baron's final regiment was shattered, the line shifted just in time to meet the incoming mercenary swarm. Spear militias charged downhill into both melee and archer units, while the retinue were held in reserve to protect the crossbows, as they continued to shoot volleys down the hill. Mercenaries began flanking from the right, prompting 2 retinue units to charge down the slope to intercept. The spears struggled heavily on the right flank but continued to make progress. Enemy archers found an angle on the crossbows, forcing them to pull back slightly. Eventually, the spears gained the upper hand and began pushing the enemy off the hill. After several more minutes of fighting, only a few enemy regiments remained. As the last units emerged from the forest, a full frontal charge was ordered across the line. The battle dragged on long enough for the month to roll over, unlocking 3 additional mercenary regiments, which the Baron promptly hired. If the first batch of mercenaries could be routed before the new ones arrived, the battle would end without having to fight them. Retinue units were ordered to charge the moment mercenaries appeared through the trees. 1 regiment fell, but the battle continued. A second archer regiment emerged and was met by sprinting spearmen, who slammed into them, routed the unit, and finally ended the battle, securing Teufelsberg. With the army still fully mustered and harvest season many months away, a claim was immediately pushed on Gabelbachau. The Baron contested the claim, but failed to send an army for nearly a month. Once May arrived, 7 fresh mercenary regiments advanced from the north. With reduced numbers from the previous fight, the militia and retinue formed a tight defensive position around the crossbows. The Baron mistakenly pushed his archers forward, allowing retinue units to charge immediately. The rest of the enemy line followed, triggering a massive melee. Crossbows focused down 1 archer regiment at a time, then shifted to the second. Shortly after, the entire enemy line collapsed under the pressure from the veteran spearmen and retinue. A single archer regiment fled west, but was eventually caught and routed by the retinue in the woods. The battle was won, and Gabelbachau was secured, leaving only 1 region remaining to conquer and settle. Across both engagements, losses totaled 12 spearmen and 15 retinue, a reasonable cost given the scale of the battles. Back in Lecha, a massive farming expansion was planned, adding 4 new farmhouses and 12 burgage plots to work over 12 morgens of new farmland. Garrison towers were constructed in any remaining regions that lacked them. Storehouse logistics in Schwarzholz was finally resolved, allowing thousands of stone to be shipped south, with mortar and rough stone now being sold for a profit. Helmets were shipped in stacks of 40 to each region with crossbow units to provide them with some proper armor. In October, raiders appeared from the north near Mistelitz. Crossbows were pulled inside the castle, and raiders were baited into attacking the retinue before retreating into the castle to create a choke point. The raiders charged in one by one and were cut down easily, proving the castle defense worked exactly as intended. Farming expansion in Lecha was pushed even further, setting up an enormous harvest for the following year. Bread production was separated from the main granary and relocated nearby to ease the logistics strain. Ale production drove approval sharply upward in Teufelsberg, granting an additional 1 treasury per burgage plot in passive income. A new settlement was founded in Gabelbachau in February, giving just enough time to secure basic infrastructure and begin food collection in March, once again selecting the Regensburg guildsman origin. By the end of the year, all spear militia were fully equipped with helmets and gambus and armor, with plans to outfit crossbow units the same next year. With the passing of year 11, the challenge entered its final phase. Deforestation around Teufelsberg began accelerating a bit too quickly, so forester huts were built to replant trees closer to the wood industry and stabilize long-term supply. Royal taxes were due again, totaling nearly 1,700 treasury this time, but annual income had climbed to almost 6,000, making payments manageable. In Gabelbachau, fish and rich berries collection began in March, allowing population growth to ramp up quickly. Burgage plots there were upgraded with apiaries to kickstart the local economy. Farming expansion continued in Lecha, along with sheep imports to support clothing and meat production. By harvesting season, Gabelbachau had grown to 10 families and a church was constructed to stabilize approval. Lecha had produced an enormous harvest this year, collecting over 550 barley, 200 flax, and 370 wheat. By winter, Gabelbachau had cleared stone from its fields in preparation for wheat farming, began mining salt, and purchased the salt trade route, turning the region into a major profit center. By the end of the year, Gabelbachau had grown to 18 families with housing and supplies ready for many more. With a few more years of development, the region was on track to become as profitable as Schwarzholz and Mistelitz. With the new region stabilized, attention fully shifted towards preparing for the final battle against the Baron for control of the last remaining region. The manor house in Gabelbachau was upgraded and the retinue was expanded to its maximum size. In late May, the entire army was mustered and rallied deep inside the Baron's territory. With the forces assembled in Im Graben, the claim was pushed and immediately contested. Since this was the Baron's final region, his response was far stronger than before. Regiment after regiment began emerging from the forests to the east. Nearly 20 enemy units in total. The retinue was ordered to hold the front line, but quickly it became clear that the line was too short, forcing the spear militia to reposition to avoid being flanked. The battle opened with the Baron's elite retinue being torn apart by crossbow fire, cut down to a third of their strength before even reaching the line. Enemy units poured out of the woods and slammed into the formation, placing immense pressure on the center and right flank. Two retinue regiments were pulled back from the left into reserve to plug gaps as they formed. The center began to falter under the weight of repeated charges, with even veteran retinue struggling to hold. Losses mounted quickly, and one retinue regiment already cut in half. The left flank, however, held firm and eventually routed their opponents, freeing two retinue units to reinforce the rest of the line. With only 6 troops remaining, one regiment was pulled from the front entirely, as more units were ordered to desperately hold the center. If the center collapsed, the battle would be lost. The right flank began to break as well, spear regiments reduced to half strength or worse, forcing the final reserve retinue to be committed in a last attempt to stabilize the right flank. With the enemy's left flank completely destroyed, a retinue regiment was freed to charge the archers. They carved through the lightly armored units, but took heavy arrow fire from another regiment further back. The center was on the verge of collapse again, and weakened units were sent back into combat knowing they would not survive. As the right flank had finally began to give away, it seemed the battle was lost. Then, at the last possible moment, a fully intact retinue regiment arrived from the rear, having moved so slowly they missed most of the fighting. The fresh unit reinforced the right flank, and the enemy line finally broke. The Baron's elite army was defeated, but only barely. As the final archer regiment was hunted down, the cost of the battle became clear. 3 full regiments had been completely destroyed, 1 spear militia and 2 retinue, while the remaining spear units survived with only 11 soldiers between the two of them. Bodies were piled high along the riverbed, left to rot in the summer heat. With the region secured, ownership transferred, and plans were made to establish the settlement during winter. Thousands of treasury were spent replacing lost retinue troops. Farming began in Gabelbachau with 6 morgens of wheat and barley planted despite poor soil, testing whether the region could support ale production for a small population or not. During harvest, raiders appeared in Lecha, and the retinue were sent alone to deal with them. The plan was to draw them back to the castle, but the raiders ambushed from the forest, forcing an immediate fight. The first 2 brigands were killed with only a single loss, but the remaining attackers inflicted heavy casualties, resulting in 6 total losses and nearly 500 treasury spent on replacements. Infrastructure was then built in Gabelbachau to support both wheat and ale production. By December, wounds had healed and the army returned to its full strength, and by February, the new town was officially founded. As the new year began, the kingdom stood unified, fully conquered, and ready to push population growth to its limits and hopefully crash the game. The main focus shifted to growing and stabilizing Im Graben, especially its farming sector. By March of the following year, over 10 morgens of farmland had been planted and were actively growing. Infrastructure was built to process incoming crops into bread, clothing, and ale. And by the end of the year, 15 morgens of farms were fully operational. Raids continued to appear every other year, but had become more of a nuisance than a real threat. By year 16, total population across all regions reached 1,200 and was still rising quickly. Midway through the year, building upgrades began to lag, a clear sign that the upper limits of the game engine were being approached. In March of year 17, population climbed to nearly 1,300, and performance issues became more noticeable, with character models that once moved smoothly now stuttering across the map. Plans were made in Teufelsberg to upgrade the castle to an enormous scale, eventually exceeding 17,000 square meters, which the engine did not handle well and caused several slowdowns. Burgage plots were packed into every available space, pushing population growth even further. By year 18, the total population had surpassed 1,500, and the game engine began to sputter under the strain, though it didn't fully crash. The castle project, however, became problematic as stone wall upgrades repeatedly failed to complete. An earlier save was loaded in an attempt to prioritize the castle first, and over the next 6 years, thousands of supplies were hauled up to the top of the hill for construction. Once the materials arrived, the project stalled, with resources sitting in the generic storage rather than being consumed for the building. Attempting to recommit the construction through the menu caused the game to freeze without crashing. After hours and hours of waiting, the in-game music finally cut out entirely, confirming that the save had been broken under the sheer size of the empire and the scale of the now 21,270 square meter castle. The final victory had been achieved and the game engine had been defeated.